My dad was a truck driver when he left the military in the late 2000s. By the time my siblings and I were born, he only drove in our home state of Texas, and summers were extremely busy for him. This incident happened in 2006 on one of his extended trips across Texas. I believe he was driving south on 281. He was getting pretty tired when he pulled into a truck stop. Making his way to the on-site convenience store, he noticed a young woman pacing back and forth at the front. She looked to be in her early 20s, slim, very pretty, and wearing a tank top with cut-off shorts. Normal attire for Texas summers. She was carrying a plate covered with aluminum foil, as if she was making her way home from a family barbecue. He finished his business in the store and headed back to his truck. As he got in, he was stunned to see the blonde woman was now sitting in his passenger seat. He was utterly shocked. He had no clue who this woman was or how she got past his locked door. My dad was always very vigilant on the road and never left his truck unlocked. He demanded that she get out. He wasn't afraid at this point, but something felt off about this mysterious woman. She sat there and looked at him, with the covered plate on her lap, not saying a word. He wondered if he should just get out, walk over to the passenger side door, and yank her out of the cab. But he decided against it. I'm still not sure why. The whole thing was beyond strange. So my dad, against his better judgment, turns his rig on and drives off, the blonde woman still in his passenger seat. A few miles up the road, he attempts to make conversation. I guess he was trying to quell the extreme discomfort he felt. He asked her name, but the woman remained silent. As he continued down the highway, lustful thoughts began to creep into my dad's mind. I'm sure it had been a while since he'd last seen my mother, out there on the rural Texas roads. Who would find out? Just this one time. My dad puts his hand on her thigh, right above her knee. As soon as he touched her, the woman turned from gorgeous into some kind of hellish monster. Her face turned rugged, and her eyes were now black pits. Her teeth had turned into sharp fangs, with a long, unnatural tongue. The demonic figure let out a guttural hiss, and from the plate she was holding came a bunch of slimy movements, as if there were a pile of writhing worms beneath the foil. A putrid smell permeated the truck's cab, and my dad quickly turned his face from her and managed to bring the truck to a stop on the side of the road. As the truck came to a halt, my dad opened his door and jumped out. After taking a few moments to compose himself, he looked back in his truck. The demonic woman had vanished. He was all alone. He started to pray, asking God to rebuke the evil spirit. He eventually got back into his truck and drove off. The woman did not return. However, it was a while before the lingering stench dissipated. When my dad got home from that trip, he recounted everything to my mother. He had been so scared that she wouldn't forgive him. My dad has seen a lot in his life, but nothing had ever frightened him like that before. He blamed himself for impure thoughts, and perhaps that's why he attracted the evil spirit. People could say that plenty of people cheat, and nothing like this happens to them. I can't explain why. I've tried several times to talk to him about what happened out there, but he never wants to talk about it. When I was younger, I was placed into a temporary foster home. No, I won't explain why, because I value a certain level of privacy. However, I will recount the first and last time I played Manhunt after dark. I was staying with a family that had a lot of land, and they did some sort of farming because there was a hay barn on the premises. All the kids in the home, about 4 to 5 at a time, would play Manhunt. Essentially, it's hide-and-seek tag. And the oldest boy convinced everyone to play after dark, and he would be it first. I was always pretty good at hiding because I was smaller than most kids my age at the time, and I decided I'd hide in the hay barn. I ran and ran as fast as I could because I could hear, we'll call the oldest boy Kevin, calling out that he was coming specifically for me first. He's around 14 and a bit of a bully. I got to the barn and dove underneath a machine used to bale up hay into stacks, and for a moment I took a sigh of relief. I couldn't hear Kevin anymore, so I started looking around the barn to make sure I was safe. I scanned all along the walls, and when I saw it, all I could do was shut my eyes and tell myself it wasn't real. I saw the decapitated head of a farmer hanging on a hook, his skin gray and sagging. I felt my blood chill and the hair stand end to end. When Kevin did find me, the look on his face told me that he knew I saw something horrible. I never played at night or went near that barn ever again. About 14 years ago, I was in my family home watching TV, laying on the couch. I got thirsty, so I stood up and went to the bar to grab a glass of juice. I was startled by the doorbell and spilled a little bit next to the glass. I put the juice jug down, turned right, and went up the stairs to my front door. When I opened the main door, leaving the outer glass door shut, no one was there. It was a nice day out, so I left the front door open and opened the window on the glass door to get a breeze in the house, then went back downstairs. I was walking back to the couch and saw myself laying down asleep. I remember the feeling I got when I saw myself, and it was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I was questioning my entire existence at that point. I stood there for nearly 2 minutes frozen in fear, and the only idea that came to my mind was to touch the other me. I reached out with my shaking right hand and stroked my left cheek with my right index finger. I felt the touch on my face for what felt like a millionth of a second, then immediately jolted awake in the position I saw myself. My first thought was, well, that was a weird dream. After thinking about it, I remembered the juice in my dream, and it made me thirsty. So I walk over to the bar, and I see the glass, the spilled drops, and the jug next to it. I look to the right up the stairs, and see the front door open with the window on the glass door open, just as it all was in my dream. I panicked hard, even started to cry. I ran upstairs to close the door, and went to hide in my closet, my safe space at the time. I didn't come out for 2 days due to how scared I was. When I saw my parents again, I told them I stayed at a friend's house, because I knew they'd just laugh at me and call me stupid for making up such a ridiculous story. I didn't have the nicest parents. I have no explanation for this. It still gives me anxiety attacks thinking about it. I haven't told anyone in my life because I'm convinced that they won't believe me, and they'd react the way my parents would have. That event still haunts me, keeps me awake, and I'm starting to question if there's something wrong with me mentally. Did I have an experience, or should I get myself assessed at a mental health clinic? I don't know what to do or how to process this event. Any advice or input would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for reading. This was in 9th grade. There was this huge state park right outside of the town I lived in. My friend and I would go down the trails every now and then. We had been walking for maybe 10 minutes when we realized there was an older woman not far behind us. I only really noticed because of how out of place she looked, like she came straight out of an old folks' home and was just dropped in the woods. We were joking around about how creepy she was and sped up to put some distance between us, but every time we did, we'd look back and still be able to spot her. We did that probably 3 times. We still thought it was funny though. We ended up running down the trail until we got to a small bridge. We hopped off the bridge into a creek and then went around a bend. We could still see the bridge from where we were. We were cracking up about the whole thing again when we saw the old lady. We had run for a good couple of minutes, like she shouldn't have been able to catch up that fast. And it was like she knew we got off the trail because she was just standing on the bridge looking around. Looking for us, it felt like. I think that's when we stopped thinking it was funny. As soon as she left, we took off running the other way. That was it though. Nothing really happened. I just always thought the whole thing was creepy. When I was in high school, my friends and I used to go to Black Snake Road to race each other. It was in a very rural area, had little traffic, and was very dark. We called it that because of several hairpin turns. However, there was a perfect half mile that was marked by a bridge on one end and a train track on the other. One night, after several of us had been racing, I found that I was the last to leave. As I approached the bridge, I saw a girl standing there, dripping wet. I stopped and asked if she was okay, and she responded that her boyfriend missed the bridge and crashed into the water. She said that he was still in the truck. I got out of my car and ran around the side of the bridge and down the embankment. It wasn't a deep river, just a shallow creek. I saw no evidence of a truck or anything out of the ordinary. Returning to the top of the bridge, I found her standing next to my car, dripping wet and crying. There were no cell phones back then, so I offered to drive her home. We could call the police from there. She accepted and directed me to her home. On the ride, she told me that her name was Sally. Her home was directly across the street from a small church a few miles away. As we pulled into the driveway, she asked me to go to the door to get her mother. I knocked on the door of the dark house, feeling a little uneasy. After all, it was after midnight by that point, and I knew that I was waking everyone in the house. After a few moments, an older lady answered the door, who I assumed was her grandmother. I told her what had happened, and that Sally was upset and wanted her mother to come to the car. That's when the story got even stranger. The lady told me that her daughter Sally had been dead for over 30 years. She had drowned when her boyfriend missed the bridge and flipped his truck, trapping her inside. Surprised and not thinking very clearly, I insisted that she come to my car, which she did, slippers, housecoat, and all. The passenger side window was rolled down, which Sally had done. My old Malibu had crank windows. They were a pain to roll down, and I could not reach the handle from the driver's seat. There was a puddle in the passenger seat, but no Sally. The lady asked me to walk across the road to the graveyard next to the church. We did, and she showed me Sally's grave. That incident started a 40-year pursuit of the paranormal for me. I have investigated all over the world since then, while serving in the military, and my work afterward. Ghosts are real. My mother and I decided to visit Nevada City, California on a whim. It's an old-timey Victorian-era mining/logging town built in 1856. Look at pictures on Google if you really want to see a creepy-ass town. It looks haunted without having to try. After eating lunch at a brew pub, we decided to stroll around the massive Pioneer Historical Cemetery on the outskirts of town. It wasn't quite dusk, but the trees are really tall in this area, so daylight is hard to gauge, and it usually feels later than it is. This cemetery was sprawling. I mean, most pioneer cemeteries are, because of the high mortality rate of the time. Lots of child graves. As we progress through the cemetery, it starts like a proper cemetery, with large ornate tombs, mausoleums, marble obelisks, family plots, etc. But what's wild about this cemetery is that it stretches on almost forever into the woods. Spooky, but this isn't a paranormal story. As we followed the cemetery deeper and deeper into the woods, it becomes hard to tell what's a grave or not, and it's getting more wild and overgrown. It eventually devolved into just wilderness, with the occasional sign of homeless camps like abandoned tents, bags of trash, etc. Luckily, the trees were opening up and more daylight was coming through, and we ended up in an open area with a large solitary juniper tree, tall brush, and a few random graves. I sort of tripped over something, and it turned out to be a purse, like a large designer purse, and it looked super old, like it had been there for a while. Looking up from the purse about 10 yards ahead, I saw what looked like a pile of women's clothing. But then I noticed, to my horror, a tangled mass of hair, and I froze. Ever know something without actually knowing something? I knew that this was a dead woman's body, down to my core. I put a hand out and stopped my mom, who was trailing behind me. "Get your phone and call the police. That's a dead body over there." And she immediately started dialing 911 because, like me, she just knew. Then it gets bananas. As my mom and I are discussing the situation, we had our attention turned away from the corpse. When we looked back at the body, I swear to God, she was sitting up with her back turned to us. She was wearing a bright red trench coat, and she had super grimy blonde hair that was more standing up than laying on her shoulders. It's like the grime in her hair allowed it to defy gravity. Slowly, she turned her head over her shoulder, like something out of a horror movie, and spotted us. She literally jumped to her feet lightning fast and turned to face us. Her front was a mess of torn clothing, and she was barely covered. In the weirdest gait I've ever seen, she rapidly advanced on us in a jerking, lurching fashion. Her hands were desperately trying to keep herself covered. My first thought was that she had been assaulted. She kept trying to speak, but it was like she couldn't form words, only make short, high-pitched squeaks. As she closed in on me, she stopped and pointed down in excitement at the purse I had tripped over. I asked if it was hers, and when I did, her expression changed into a horrible smirk. It still haunts me. And suddenly, she was slowly starting to undress herself, and we had to shout to get her to stop. By this point, we had the cops on the way. We said we had found someone in serious distress. Be that as it may, we both knew this was not a safe situation for us, and we quickly backed away, turned, and cooked it out of there. When we followed up with the police out of concern and morbid curiosity, they said whoever we found must have fled, because they didn't find her. I hope to God she's okay, and gets the help she needs. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Links to all my shit are down in the description. Be good to animals, even people. See ya.
Ja, snäma, bärksbes, hörs.